often talk about the divide between Wall Street and Main Street, but what about the growing gap between Washington and Main Street? USA Today analyzed data from the Office of Personnel Management. Now, this is an organization that tracks salaries for more than 2 million federal workers. This does not include members of Congress or anyone that works in the White House. And they found that the number of federal employees earning $100,000 is up almost 50% since the beginning of this recession. Those that make $150,000 or more has doubled, more than doubled, up 120%. And those making $170,000 or more has nearly doubled, up 95%. Congressman Jason Chaffetz of Utah is a ranking member on the House Subcommittee on the Federal Workforce. He's calling for a hearing on the matter. Good to have you with us. We appreciate it. Congressman Chaffetz, let me just ask you, I mean, these numbers are pretty shocking. Do you have any sense of why this is happening?
Yeah, but it doesn't mean we can justify it. I mean, what's happened is we have a very low turnover rate. In my mind, and from a business community standpoint, we're overcompensating people. This is just their base salary. I mean, for people to make $150,000 or more and have that number over the past 18 months literally double is unsustainable and unacceptable. It's unfathomable to understand that there are 66,000 federal employees making in excess of $150,000 a year. It's just, we can't keep doing that.
And one of the things that the USA Today analysis also found, and some people may have heard this, I believe that Alan Greenspan quoted it on Meet the Press this weekend, was that the average federal worker's pay is now $71,200 compared to $40,000 in the private sector. I mean, that is a huge gap. It's nearly double what the average person makes. Should we cut that amount now? I mean, what do you do now that we are here?
What I would love to do is see across-the-board cuts in terms of the number of federal employees and also the compensation that we have out there. I think we're going to have those dramatic cuts. But the Congress just on Friday, last Friday, voted to increase the base budget of 6 departments by 12%. So there's no sense here in the Congress that they're actually making the hard decisions and making the cuts. And when you hear the administration and when you hear this Congress say, oh, we're going to make tough decisions and we're concerned about the debt and the deficit, there is no evidence that that is actually happening. Because now, for the first time in history, we actually have more federal employees earning more than $100,000 than we do federal employees who are making $40,000 or less.
All right. Well, Congressman Chaffetz, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And again, he's calling a hearing on this matter.
Yes.
Well, let's tackle this a little bit further. Are federal workers gliding on easy street when the rest of America is tightening its belt and 1 in 10 Americans don't have jobs? Weighing in, James Shirk, a labor economist with the Heritage Foundation, and David Madland, director of the American Worker Project at the Center for American Progress. Gentlemen, good to have both of you with us. Let's get straight to it, David. Is there any way to justify this?
Well, this isn't about justifying it. I think first we need to be clear what's really happening here is that most federal employees actually are paid less than their private sector counterparts. The studies you've been talking about are grossly misleading because when you compare apples to apples, you look at the skills and qualifications of federal employees and compare them to private sector workers. Private sector workers earn about 25% more than federal employees. That's because federal employees have much higher levels of education. Think of all the government scientists, just for example. So that's the first thing to be clear here, is that federal employees are, for the most part, are not on easy street. In fact, the vast majority of federal employees are earning right in the middle, about between sort of $50,000, $75,000. That's really where the core of federal employees are earning.
So you're saying just in terms of the overall number. Okay, go ahead, James.
I was going to say that's simply not the case. Once you take a look at both the pay they earn and then also the benefits, because they get quite generous benefits, then federal employees are earning about 50% more than equivalently skilled private sector workers. Control for education, for their age, experience, the sort of things you'd want to control for. Because it's fair for a more educated worker to get higher pay. Of course, he's more productive. But control for that. And they're getting about 50% more. I mean, it's simply not the case that they earn less once you control for these factors.
David, what about, let me just give you just an anecdote here. We called to get a comment on this story from the American Federation of Government Employees, who you would think would want to come out and give some of the defense that you're giving. We called them at 4:30 yesterday. No one was there, and we still haven't gotten a call back. Now, I'm just giving you that as sort of the stereotypical example of how a lot of people perceive government employees. I mean, are they really having the same threat of being fired as everybody else and working just as hard?
What you're getting at is these stories are really playing into the stereotype, and some of the stereotype is probably justified, but really it's kind of easy pickings, just sort of blaming problems and looking for cuts for federal employees. So the congressman's point, if he was really interested in getting to the cutting of budget and deficit, he really would be focusing on the core issue here, which is where most of the federal money right now is going, is talking about bailing out banks. He was one of the members of Congress. Hold on. He voted against any sort of re-regulation of the banking industry to prevent the financial crisis that got us into the current economic downturn and required major federal bailouts. That's really where the focus should be. So much of what you're seeing is just sort of scapegoating.
But in this conversation, it's on federal employees and how we can defend that they're making more money than everybody else. I mean, David, do you think it's worth at least going through line by line, taking an overall analysis and taking a hard look, saying, hey, this person has done a great job, it's justified, this person hasn't, we're going to let them go?
Of course. That goes without saying. There is no justification for wasting taxpayer money, and everything needs to be on the table, including salaries of federal employees. That should be on the table. But I think if you look at what the administration is starting to do, it's absolutely on the right track. For example, the president's proposed budget includes only a 2% increase in salary. That's basically up with the pace of inflation. That is far less than private sector workers have seen their salary increase even during this Great Recession.
Well, they did lag inflation. I mean, so, net, the average American worker, whether that be federal or not, didn't even keep up with inflation with salary over the past decade, though. But, yes. James, final word to you briefly before we go.
Well, just look at that 2% pay increase. Over the past year, inflation's been basically flat. It hasn't been 2%. Yet every single federal worker is getting this 2% pay increase. I mean, that's an example of what's going on. Whether you did a good job or a bad job, you're getting this pay increase. That's why they make so much more. Take a look at Wall Street. There are a lot of people who messed up, but those who did a bad job have lost their jobs. Well, that's not the case in Washington, and that's the problem.
Some haven't. I mean, and there you go into the other can of worms, which I know is another conversation. But, gentlemen, thanks very much for raising some of the questions and some of the thoughts here. We appreciate it. James Shirk, David Madeline, for joining us.